Okay, today I'm delighted to be joined by Gerald Leonard, who's the Chief Executive Officer of Turnberry Premier and also a business author and a jazz musician. Welcome to the podcast, Gerald.
Mark, thank you so much for having me. I'm really happy to be here.
And normally I give a slightly longer introduction than that, but I thought it would probably be better hear from yourself because we can for those of us watching a video can see the instruments behind you,
Right.
but the music is very much integrated in what you do in terms of business consulting and keynoting and things. So perhaps you could tell us your story of those two streams of your life and how they interact.
Sure. I'd be happy to. Well, I started playing music, and if you can look behind me, let me go this way. Right behind me on the other side here, there's like a red guitar.
Yeah.
That used to belong to my sister when I was 10 years old. That's how I got started. She even held on to it and gave it to me. And I was taking piano lessons, but I really fell in love with playing that guitar. And that led me to really focusing on, obviously the guitar and the bass. I joined the band with some friends of mine at the time, and one was an amazing guitar player. So I knew that my role was not going to be the guitar player, so I became the bass player, and that defined the rest of my life. And there are lessons that I learned as a kid growing up in Lakeland, Florida, which is Central Florida, back in the day, playing music. And that was one, you got to practice. Two, you got to know the whole song and really understand the pattern of music. Three, I'd say, yeah, three, if you really want to get better, you need to get a coach. You need to have someone who plays better than you, who's more senior than you, who you can learn from. And then the fourth thing was you got to have a band. You got to have people that you can talk with and play with. And so as I went through, school and college, I actually majored in music in college. I did my bachelor's and my master's in college in music and played professionally in New York. And then, I was married, got married and I had a couple of kids, did some ministry work. And I decided, how I grew up, my dad was always in my life.
Yeah.
And so I felt like I needed to stay local. So I played locally in the New York area, but I got into business. And so at that time I did some ministry work and then I got into business. And I used the same principles that I used when I was a 10-year-old kid, which is you got to practice. Whatever field you get into, you got to practice it. You got to figure out how to practice it. Two, you need a coach. So you need someone who is advanced in that particular area, whether it's consulting or project management or writing or speaking. And then you need a band. You need an organization where you can talk shop, you can play with the ideas and so on. And so I have used those concepts throughout my career. And now, even as a CEO of two companies, Turnberry Premier and the Leonard Productivity Intelligence Institute, I still figure out what are the things that I have to do as a CEO that I need to practice, right? Whether it's business strategy or design thinking or learning about AI. Finding the right coach. And sometimes finding the right coach may be partnering with an institution. I've taken classes at Harvard, at the Wharton School, at Kellogg, at Johns Hopkins around AI, and then with around sustainability, and then finding your band, finding organizations or associations where you can be a part of. So I'm a part of a different masterminds with other business owners or entrepreneurs where I can learn. And so what's interesting is that music has always played a part of that. And I've been playing since I was 10 years old. And I've continually played. I think this year I released the beginning of the year, 4 songs that I did of the Beatles songs called Beatles on Bass. And then based on a book I'm just releasing at the end of this month called Productivity Smarts. So all of that is all together. And I found that it really liberated me because I am who I am, right? Music is a big part of who I am, but I'm also a learner, someone who loves growing, someone who loves partnering, and so on. So that's really been the essence of my career.
Yeah, you might be able to make out which side I'm pointing at a guitar neck behind me as well. That guitar being a teenager, but I can. Mediocre would be an exaggeration, I think, of my abilities. So maybe I should have taken some of that advice at the time. So
Never too late.
How did this lead you on then to sustainability?
Well, well, one of my clients is a major Fortune 500 company, and they, have asked all of their suppliers that they really want to grow with, hey, you need to take a look at the sustainability roadmap because you guys are a part of our sustainability platform, our baseline, and we need all of our key partners who want to continually work with us to do that. And so this was a number of years ago, like 3 or 4 years ago that's happened. And when I got into it, I did a lot reading on a lot of books on sustainability, and there's 4 major books that I read, and then I did a mind map, and I realized that sustainability is really just taking project, program, portfolio management focused on the sustainability or carbon accounting space.
Yeah.
Because I'd gone to a number of workshops before that, and I heard a lot about recycling, reuse, and so on and so forth. But it never gave me like, okay, how do you measure this? How do you how do you get a baseline of where you are, and how do you direct going to net zero and those kinds of things? And so by going down this other road of really studying the material and then finding a partner company like Greenly over in Paris. I've initially reached out to Watershed, but they only work with the big companies like Coca-Cola and Pepsi and so on. And so, but they did point me to some additional resources. And then I found Greenly. And after using them for myself in my own company to help us to get our carbon-based footprint, I realized that there's so many other companies that don't have that knowledge, and they don't have my background in all of the technology of projects and programs and portfolio. And so I also saw that it was a business opportunity. And so besides using it for myself and my own company to provide services to my company, to my client, I used it as a way for us to grow our business. But in the meantime, as I was doing it for ourselves, we became a preferred supplier and a tier 1 supplier to this particular client. Yeah. So by embracing sustainability, it had a major impact on our revenue and on our status within the supply chain of the company. And it's opened up many, many other doors for us that would not have happened if I hadn't gone down that road.
Yeah, I find that fascinating because it's the evolving business landscape you've responded to.
Yes.
And seen the opportunity and exploited that. And we normally think of that in terms of sort of people making components for a particular green technology or something like that. But It's interesting from business services that you've evolved that to meet that need.
Exactly. Because there's this big thing around scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3. Scope 1 is when, like an energy company is emitting gases in the air, or they're creating, this huge carbon footprint, right? That's scope 1. Scope 2 is you're using electric vehicles and so on. But scope 3 is for services where you really are not emitting any greenhouse gases in your business, right? Because you're a consultant, but you do fly, you do drive to work, you do engage in business activities, you do use services that are using that. And scope 3 is about the value chain of how your business is impacting the earth and society with a carbon footprint for just doing business. And by understanding that and getting your arms around it and making that a part of your business's mission, it makes your business more attractive, and it actually has an impact on your P&L or your income statement. So it reduces your expenses and it increases your revenue because of the businesses that you're able to work with.
Yeah, fantastic. And I was reading some of your writing on business in general and sustainability, and you cite neuroscience, which grabbed my interest. So let's start with 101. Can you explain to our listeners what neuroscience is and how it applies to business?
Sure. Neuroscience, when it comes to business, is a study of how the brain and our nervous system drives behavior, decision-making, and change. Mm-hmm. And so, I had the pleasure of studying, after reading her book with a lady named Dee Jacob before she passed away in 2019, and got a certification in neuroscience with her group called, and she had a program called Conversational Intelligence. That was the name of her book. And she talked about just the neuroscience of conversations. You know, that when we meet someone within 0.07 seconds of meeting that person, your brain knows whether you're going to have a good conversation or not. Mm-hmm. Your brain knows whether you can trust them or not. And so by understanding brain science and understanding that our conversations are much more chemical than they are verbal. In other words, based on the conversation and the tone of the conversation, my brain, your brain, and listeners' brains are producing oxytocin, dopamine, serotonin, and GABA, these positive neurochemicals. And so we lean forward into the conversation and we get engaged. Yeah. If we were having a conversation and it started taking a left turn, right, and it started going the wrong way, our brains would start producing cortisol and adrenaline. Yeah. We would start getting tense in our neck. We would start feeling a little tense. We'd start feeling a little frustrated, and it wouldn't be going as smooth. And it's because the brain is beginning to produce these negative neurochemicals, but the person who we're talking to, their brains are also producing those negative neurochemicals. So by understanding neuroscience in marketing and leadership and so on, you can position the things that you're doing and do them in a way that will produce more of the bonding and positive neurochemicals in your teammates and so on. And it's really an understanding of, hey, how do I communicate in a way that creates a connection more than expel people away from what I'm trying to get them to do?
Yeah, and that seems particularly applicable in sustainability because, to be honest, a lot of people who are very passionate about sustainability will push their point almost quite aggressively, and they get that sort of fight or flight response that you're talking.
Right. Exactly. And that's not the way to do it, right? You really have to, a lot of people are pushing sustainability because one-on-one, it is a governmental requirement or compliancy, right? Let's just be honest. There are some things out there that says, hey, thou shall do this and I shall do that. That's one way to look at it. The other way to look at it, as I've, for myself, have learned, is that building a sustainable business, not only just business-wise sustainable, but from a carbon, people, society, and so on, that is just good business.
Yeah.
Right. And I've actually read books and studied material that shows that you can tie a company's sustainability practices to the impact of their bottom line, how much money they keep in the coffer. Right. Mm-hmm. And, when it comes to sustainability, it's all about being efficient and using, the whether it's electricity or different resources or recycling and so on. But all of those things are cost cutting, are creating an optimal and more efficient business. Well, if you do that as a practice, your business becomes more streamlined and it reduces the expenses to the business. While at the same time, investors are looking at your business saying, hey, he's creating more of a sustainable consulting practice, a sustainable business. He's supporting these areas within our sustainability and so on. They see that as something that's very positive. Younger employees they will inherit the earth that us older people will be leaving. They're looking for a sustainable earth, right? They're looking for a sustainable place to live, bring the temperature down, and so on and so forth. So they're more excited about being a part of sustainability. So now I'm attracting employees that are really more mindful of that. I'm attracting investors. I'm attracting other customers. So my revenue and my employee turnover drops. My revenue goes up. My expenses go down. How can you not have an impact on the bottom line of your business to have more profits by building a sustainable business? And you're meeting the requirements around sustainability and the governmental requirements as well. So I look at it from that perspective.
Well, if you'll excuse the pun, that's music to my ears because I would say it's business. Work out what the business case for sustainability is for them specifically. Right. And work to that strategy. And sometimes I get a bit of pushback on that. Some people think that's greenwash. that
Yeah.
that if you are actually getting a business benefit, then somehow it doesn't count. But I think that's I think that's crazy thing
Now,
personally.
now, now, here's the thing. Greenwashing is a real thing, right? Greenwashing is where a company is saying, hey, we're doing sustainability, but they have no data to prove the impact that they're making. But if you're using a platform, let's say I'll just use my partner company, Greenly, where you're tracking your carbon-based footprint year over year, and you're showing that you're reducing your carbon-based footprint and you're tracking your employee activity, you're tracking all these numbers, and you can show that you're going towards net zero. That's not greenwashing. That's being genuine because now you're not only talking about it and it's benefiting your business, but you also have reports and the data from certified organizations, whether it's science-based targets, CDP, CSRD, all those different acronyms out there around sustainability, you're able to comply with those and show that you are walking the walk. You're talking the talk, but you're walking the walk, and you actually have the data to back up what you're saying. That's no longer greenwashing. That's doing good business doing in a green way.
Although I do find that having all the data and all the arguments all the logical arguments lined up is never quite enough. There's that, and that's why I was interested in the neuroscience. To me, there's a deeper emotional need to get away from that sort of fight or flight that we were talking about, the threat, and into the seeing everything as an opportunity, not just in business terms, but personal terms as well.
Exactly. And it, even with all that data, when it comes to that component or that part of it, it is about how you tell your story. Mm-hmm. And if you think about it, the best way to share this information about sustainability and why it's important is through storytelling.
Yeah.
Right. Because everyone loves a good story. And if we hear a story that's in line with our beliefs and our mindset, it reduces those anxieties or that, the cortisol or the negative neurochemicals and helps us to engage in that more.
Yeah, it's interesting because I hadn't thought of it in terms of the adrenaline and cortisol before. So that's opened my mind to understanding a little bit, I suppose, why some people react badly.
Exactly.
And that you do have to work your magic. I call it green jiu-jitsu, which is about working out what makes people tick and then pressing those buttons rather than what I think.
Right.
You've already mentioned a couple of times the Greenly Carbon platform. How did that relationship come about?
Again, it was around that time that I was, working with my Fortune 500 client. Mm-hmm. I had done a lot of research and a lot of reading. And in my research, I discovered Greenly. Mm-hmm. I have for 25 plus years been a project portfolio management expert using tools like Transparent Choice or using tools like the Microsoft Project Server. And when I saw their platform, it just all the bells and whistles went off in my head because I was like, oh, this is a carbon-based accounting system that's very similar to what I'm used to using when I'm tracking multi-million or billion-dollar portfolios for companies in their portfolio, their CapEx portfolio. But this is doing the same types of things, but it's focused on sustainability. Mm-hmm. So it goes in and you're capturing your financial data and you're tying it to the impact of a carbon emission. You're tracking your activity data and you're tying it to carbon emission. You're surveying your employees in a very user-friendly way through an engaged set of links and websites and questionnaires that educates them, but also you're collecting that data and it all shows up in one data repository. So now when it's all collected, I can then go to another tab and I see all the reports. I can see where the challenges are. And what was lovely about it was I do this in the project management space is when you're trying to mature an organization, right? You do a maturity assessment. And to me, that's like being in a factory that's dark and you find the light switch.
Yeah.
and you click the light switch on, and now you see you see the floor, you see the machines, you see where things are. If you try to walk through that factory with the lights off, you're going to hurt yourself. You're going to run into things. And that's what people do when it comes to, maturing an organization, but they haven't done an assessment. Well, doing a carbon-based assessment or doing the carbon-based accounting is like turning the lights on in your business from a carbon accounting standpoint. You can now see what things are. You can see where the big culprits are, where you're spending most of your resources on that are emitting carbon. So now you also know where to focus, right? Because if you don't have that information and you say, okay, we're going to start doing sustainability, we're going to start by recycling, reusing, redo, and this and that, you don't know if you're making a difference or not. But if you have the data and you've done the assessment and you understand your carbon-based footprint and you've turned the lights on, now you can look and go, that's where we're having the biggest impact. If we can reduce our carbon in that area by 50%, we're like almost halfway there, or we're like, 70% there as far as the big culprit. So when you do that, it makes it really clear where you are and what you need to be doing, so that then you're no longer guessing or throwing darts in the dark trying to hit a bullseye, but you actually turn the lights on. Now you see the bullseye. You know exactly where to throw the dart to make a difference.
Yeah. Do you work with a particular sector or sectors of businesses, or do you work across the board?
We actually work across the board. We can work with any type of company. We tend to work with like fintech companies. We tend to work with other consulting business or professional services companies that have a lot of scope 3. We're now beginning to talk to large retailers about their scope 3 emissions as well. And again, other big professional services firms. But it literally can go across the board, because whether it's a manufacturing company or whether it's a retailer or a professional service, a lot of the same elements apply. Obviously, there are certain things that are different, especially when you get into life cycle management of a product. From cradle to grave, what is the carbon-based footprint? But what's beautiful about the Greenly platform is that it contains all the various elements to be able to capture, whether it's you're talking about your life cycle for products, whether you talk about your greenhouse gas emissions, your CSRD reporting directives over in European countries. You're able to capture all that information in one place and be able to have a team of experts who are behind you. And that was the other thing that really attracted me, was just like I said, as a musician, I always wanted someone who was a tour guide and not a travel agent. Yeah. Right. A travel agent teacher is someone who says, this is what you got to do, but they've never done it. They can't play it. They can't do it. I've always went after tour guides who could play what they're trying to tell me to play. So I could watch them and go, oh, that's how I do it. And now I could get better faster.
Yes.
I want the same thing when it comes to climate experts. I want people who are real climatologists, real climate experts who have their PhD, come from reputable universities, who've built a system that I can say, hey, I know if I follow this pathway, it's going to lead me to making sure I capture and I'm doing all of the right things. And that's why in my own studies, you look at my LinkedIn profile, I've taken a number of classes at Wharton or at Harvard or at Johns Hopkins. Why? Because I know those are reputable institutions, and the time I spend with them is going to take me much further than just reading a book by myself or trying to just kind of pick it up from some guru. But now I know it's peer reviewed, it's industry standards, and so on. So I'm very picky about my tour guides.
Yes. Well, every US guest who comes on the podcast, I inevitably have to ask them about the current situation in the US.
Yeah.
President Trump has signaled he's withdrawing the US from the Paris Agreement again. We had the large Empire wind farm cancelled at the very last minute. And there seems to be an awful lot of other executive orders that are sort of anti-green, even down to plastic and paper straws. So how does it feel on the ground?
Well, here's the thing on the ground is you have your authoritative or political direction or directive, But like in every company, you may have your organizational chart directive, but then you also have the social directive within the company. And many times those two are at odds
Yeah.
because it's like informal leadership within the military. You can have a formal leader, the general, the captain, the major, but then informally there may be a lower ranked person that everybody comes to get the answers from,
Yeah.
right? And so what's happening in the world is Fortune 500 companies exist in most other nations.
Mm.
They're still required by EU, by the UK, by Asia, by different other countries, by Australia to comply with greenhouse gas emissions, and that their entire company, not just the part of the company that's in that country,
Yeah.
but their entire organization has to comply. So even though Fortune 500s may change some words or two on their website, they are still in compliance with all of the rules and regulations by the European standards and by all those different acronyms I talked about, science-based targets, CSRD compliance, CDP, all those different acronyms around sustainability requirements. They still have to meet those because there are other countries that they're working in, they still need to comply, which means that not only do their US based portions of the company has to comply, but all of their US based suppliers still have to comply. Now, again, they may change some of the verbiage on their website so it's not as obvious, but they're still but at a social level, the compliance is still happening. Things are still happening, even though at a political, at an authoritative visual level, it looks like it's being changed. It's still happening because, the U.S. is like 4% of the world's population.
Yeah.
Right. And so we still have the rest of the 96% of the world that we need to work with.
Yeah. Although you're the biggest economy.
That's really interesting.
Yes, there was a joke going around that if the tariffs had stayed the way they were threatening, Donald Trump might do more to reduce global carbon emissions than any president in history by slowing down trade. But it's an interesting thing because those sort of transboundary pieces of legislation have always been. Have always had this global effect. The clues in the name, and we get affected by US legislation on, in particular, conflict minerals. Is that the Dodd-Frank Act? Am I getting right, or is that the banking? I can't remember off the top of my head. But that conflict minerals legislation in particular affects businesses in the UK and Europe. And even though we're officially outside Europe now, I sat and ran a workshop with motor manufacturers and their supply chain, and they were all talking about CBAM and CSRD and the deforestation regulations, which are all EU regulations. So I think you're absolutely right. Those drivers don't go away because
right.
one piece of the jigsaw falls out. They're still there.
Exactly. And it's, and it's going to have a big impact, and they're all of the Fortune 500s are compliant with it. And again, it pushes it down to its supply chain, which are all the other consulting firms or service companies or product companies that provide services to those companies. They still have to comply to meet that need.
But going back to the neuroscience, do you find you have to adjust the language or the approaches you're using with business leaders when the circumstances change?
Sure. It's always the stance of how can I present the information or the approach to what we're doing. It's the same thing with AI right now, right? If you start talking about an AI project and cost savings, everyone gets afraid. That's the negative neurochemicals of I'm going to lose my job, or this is going to happen, or that's going to happen. So it's all about how you're phrasing what you're doing. And that's why, companies like Microsoft have said, hey, it's a co-pilot. We're not taking your job, we're enhancing your job, right? Yeah. And so it's the same thing with sustainability. If we present it in a way that it's enhancing and building up your activities, but it's not replacing or it's not penalizing you, then you're going to have more people, leaning forward, leaning into it because you're speaking more of the language of the positive neurochemicals than the negative. As
Yeah.
long as anything around compliance or job, reduction or save cost savings, everyone automatically goes towards this is either going to restrict me or it's going to penalize me or it's going to take away my job. And as soon as those words come out of their mind, their mouth, or their thoughts come up, those negative neurochemicals come up.
Yeah.
I mean, it's instantaneous when that happens. And so it's really important for us as leaders to phrase things in a way not to play games with people's minds, but to be honest, but to phrase things in a way that will encourage more of the positive mindset and the positive neurochemicals, and understanding that, communication is not just verbal, it's chemical. And what you say and the way you say it can either increase the positive chemicals or increase the negative. And we're responsible for how we are to do one or the other.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's an interesting. I said fight or flight, but I suppose there's a third F, which is freeze.
Yes.
And a lot of people will, in terms of in uncertain times, that sort of fear will lead them to do nothing. I sometimes argue my worst competitor is do nothing.
And that happens a lot.
Yeah, and it's always trying to get people, and again, it comes back to that psychology of change, doesn't
Yes.
it? And get them to want to do what they know they should do, but sometimes do nothing seems a bit too comfortable.
Yeah, and if people see the benefit for them, right?
Yeah.
Because everybody's always tuned into the WIFM radio station. What's in it for me?
Yeah.
Right. So as soon as you say something, their brain goes, okay, but what's in it for me? And how's that going to impact me? And where's that going to lead me? And what is that going to do for me? And if you can phrase things, position things, say things, document things in a way that people can see the positiveness, even, whether you're implementing a solution, implementing a technology in a company, rolling out a policy, if people can look at what you're putting out and see how it's going to benefit their lives, they're going to lean forward. Yeah. If they see how you're going to restrict, how you're going to reduce, how you're going to take away, how you're going to eliminate, then they're going to stand, they're going to be like a dog, that don't want to go for a walk, right? You're trying to take your dog for a walk. He puts his paws down, the collar's pulling on him, and you don't have to drag him or pick him up because he doesn't want to go. That's the primal brain. It doesn't want, it just puts its paws down and it doesn't want to go. And so we have to phrase things differently, provide that treat and provide those the things that is what's in it for them, that they're going to get out of it, that they want, that will allow them to lean forward.
Yes, all my dog owning friends always have a pocket full of dog treats for that very purpose. It seems to sort out things very quickly. So I've really enjoyed our conversation so far, but the clock is ticking. So yep. I was just wondering if I could ask you if you could go back in time to when you got started in all this. What advice would you give yourself?
I would say build more partnerships and relationships. Focus on continuously learning, continuously all the time. But I would say accelerate the number of relationships and partnerships because my partnerships and relationships have accelerated my business growth. They've accelerated my life. Learning from my mentors and coaches who are tour guides, again, not travel agents, but tour guides that I can trust, have accelerated my growth. And so I would say, to my younger self, be more active in searching for the right tour guides that can accelerate your growth, whether in a partnership or through just mentoring and coaching in various areas of your life.
Yeah. Again, I find that interesting. a lot of my consultancy work is sort of, and you mentioned having mastermind with other business owners, but a lot of my consultancy work is using that sort of mastermind model, where getting people to learn from each other rather than suppose me coming in and telling them what to do. It seems to work very well. Okay, well, Gerald, thank you so much for joining us today. I've really enjoyed our conversation. I'm going to say thank you to goodbye in a minute, but don't hang up on the podcast or the recording, everyone, because I'm going to put a snippet of Gerald's single Vertigo in after we say goodbye, so you can have a hear of that and listen to that, and I'll put some links, suitable links in the show notes as well, Gerald. But thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's been a pleasure.